Welcome back to the Daily Edge. I'm here with my two brothers, as always, TJ Daly and Todd Daly. And today is going to be an interesting topic. I feel like we started with that. Today is going to be interesting. We're going to talk about community, especially in males. I don't know if we want to call us middle-aged, but when you get outside of high school, then if you don't go to college, or maybe you do outside of college, there's a point in time where male friendship and companionship becomes challenging. I think there are certain things that we do in life that bring men together. Watching sports or maybe playing sports, those are things that we do a lot more often when we're younger. But I really, as you get older, I think there's something that's really important with community. I was talking to a chiropractor one time, a guy that I respect, and I said, what do you attribute longevity of life to? And he said, really the number one thing is community. It's like having people to do life with over a long period of time. So I'm fascinated with forming and keeping groups of men together. And so I would love one of you, I don't know which, to jump in here. And I would say you both have communities that you're a part of. Talk to me a little bit about how you've been able to establish your male communities, what you think is important, and how that's playing a role in your life.
I read an article the other day that talked about how most men's groups fail. And, I think in a lot of cases, and I think this works fairly well for females, and this is why this typically more of the model is like, hey, let's get together around a shared interest, and let's try and sustain a community around that. I think a lot of times that requires a level of vulnerability and or a sharing of feelings that is not natural for men. I will say the men's groups that I have had success with or that have formed really, really well hinged on one of two things. One, someone in that community being very vulnerable early on, that created a depth of connection that was then built upon over time. I remember my Exodus group Exodus group is basically a church group that forms over basically we do kind of a 90-day program leading up into Easter. And
You should talk a little bit about that program.
Sure. In 2022, when I did that a second time, we had a couple of guys that right out of the gate just got extremely vulnerable with the group. And the way that accelerated formation relative to the other groups I've been a part of was really, really impressive. So that's something that stuck with me. And I think that makes a lot of sense because naturally I don't think men are as vulnerable. And so I think that's a barrier to community formation. The other thing is around accomplishment. When another group, I think of the other group that I would say is really, really strong, that I'm a part of, it's around kind of doing hard things and or accomplishing things together and getting a shared bond through that. Sometimes that's a lot of the case with fraternities. That's how a lot of fraternity bonds are formed, because you go through pledgeship together. You go through that difficult experience together, and that builds bonds. The men's groups that I have been a part of that haven't lasted, that have failed, which there's been plenty, have missed both of those components. Mm. And so I guess over time, that's the pattern that I've identified.
What I've seen and what I see, because my groups are more roller coaster-ish, it takes a lot of effort. And I don't think it's something that we naturally do. I'm terrible at it. I've recognized that over the years, that rarely am I the person to reach out to do something. Luckily, I've got people, and it goes back to, I think there's some like-mindedness. And I think one of the things that makes it difficult today is there's differing ideas and expectations around what a man is. If you think back to, I think about our grandfather, is scotch and cigars. Like, that was kind of it, and you got together and you did those things, or, you participated in those types of you were part of, like you went to whether it was a club for veterans. Escaping me the different names that those particular locations have, but there were the Aero Club, right? So there were a lot of clubs back then that were exclusive to men, and you just go there and drink and smoke cigars and talk, after work. That's not as prevalent anymore, because I think we feel like there's more expected of us. So we're not able to, we don't believe we're able to allot that amount of time. I think there's pressure in that regard. The other thing that,
Do you think kids, like you just said, there's more expected of us? I would arguably say that we're more involved in kids' lives than maybe past generations. So some of this could be time, right? It's having the availability to do it, but some of it is like most men are more engaged in family time, or they prioritize that more. Do you think that's had an impact on connection and keeping up with other men?
I think that in my life, it's been huge. One of the things that we've always wanted to do is have a weekend run club, but it's just, there's too much prioritized around, you see the run clubs that do exist. People are normally in another season or stage of life where their kids are in college or out of the house, and I don't fault any of my friends for prioritizing their kids' events. I do the same things at times, but yes, I've seen that, I think personally, really throw a wrench into doing things consistently with people. And then it goes back to it requires that much more effort to reach out consistently. And sometimes you will have that person in the community that's really good at doing that, but it definitely, I think, makes it more difficult. Yeah.
I'll add one more flavor to that: guilt. Whether it's kid guilt or your spouse is like, you're going to, our dad played cards twice a week. Like it was a non-negotiable for mom. It's like, I'm playing cards Mondays and Wednesdays. I'm out at 8:00. I'll help you get the kids to bed. Peace. I'm gone. Like, I'm not sure I would feel or have the freedom to do that. Is that another component of getting together with men, is just the guilt of, well, from your spouse or from your kids or anyone else?
I think it can be made a priority around those things. I think for me, because I think I think we were, the basis of this is that I think it is a little bit easier for females to form some of those groups. And I think they're under some of the same time pressures. So I don't know that it's necessarily a shortage of time. Certainly there was a point in time when I think it was more socially acceptable for men to be less or participate less in the household or family kid related activities. I think it's probably been a positive trend that there's been more involvement there. For me, I think a lot of this is too, it's around the depth of the connection. Because even, we were talking with Dad earlier, and he's talking about you can play golf with guys and you could do certain activities with guys, but a lot of times it's a very surface level connection, or you're just participating in an activity together versus getting into depth, which I think that's where a lot of the fulfillment comes from in relationship, is when you can get underneath the surface. And I know we've all been through phases in our lives where we had 100 different acquaintances, and it was very surface level conversation, maybe a little deeper than how's the weather and how are you doing. But now it's this type of stuff with a much smaller group of, you're pontificating on different things. And if you don't have like family, whether that's siblings or close cousins or whatever, I think it can be very difficult to get to a level of depth that provides that fulfillment.
Well, do you guys think that men just don't really make it a priority? Like, family's more important, providing's more important. Last on the list is calling somebody to hang out for whatever reason. Is that a problem too?
I would say, yeah. I would say for sure, at least for me personally. I can't speak for others, and I think some are more wired to organize things socially. But I would say, in prioritizing it and even just valuing it in general, I don't know that men are naturally oriented to look at things and say, gosh, I really miss that connection. I really need that connection or community in my life. It's like, nope, I'm going to plow through today and I'm going to get through tomorrow, and I'm just going to keep grinding and grinding and grinding. So I think that some of that disposition is probably not productive.
One of the things that is interesting to me is, it's like you said in a prior episode, you don't know how good you feel until something triggered when you were having issues with your foot and it got worse over time. You took some medicine and then it was like, oh my gosh, I didn't know I could feel this good. I wonder if that's very similar with connection. I have individuals in my life, men in my life that I do life with. Obviously, I have my brothers, but I have other people that I go to. We've talked about life coaches, and I think there's a couple of different components here. I think there's community for men to do life together, to talk about the centerpieces of our lives, whether that's our faith, our fitness, our families. But I also think there's a component of life coaching, of where you have someone that's going to hold you accountable to the things that you say are important. How do you, like, for men, and there's been times in my life where I got to do it all. It's all me. I'm going to take it on. And I'm just kind of locked in. It's me against the world mentality. Do you feel like having those relationships and those people are super important? Do you guys experience that in your life? How do you navigate that?
I the way you started that thought, I was actually having that exact same thought at the exact same time, meaning that this morning's a good example. I've been doing a lot of running on my own, and as everybody knows by this point in time, it's a big centerpiece of my life. And I yesterday texted a couple buddies. I'm like, hey, are you guys still doing your Thursday morning run club? And I went out there and I did that. It was just me and one other guy this morning. But after I was finished, it was like, wow, I miss having conversations out there. I like this group of guys. I like their perspective. He's a good listener, or it was a great conversation. Shout out Matt Mitchell. So that was great this morning. And I find that, after I go run with, I have a group of 4 or 5 guys, Caleb, Unicorn, whatever, JR, that after I run with them, I'm like really grateful I did. And we had a good conversation, and it's very cathartic. But again, like you said, it's kind of out of sight, out of mind. And there's, at this point, I think in life, it takes sacrifice on behalf of everybody to make things work. And I've struggled with feeling like I'm getting taken advantage of in terms of bending my life for others and feeling like I'm not getting it back. So, that's been something I've struggled with over the years, and I'm sure other people feel that way too, because men are so bad at this. I think there can be some level of resentment, which sounds strange. You think of resentment, you think more of your relationship with your wife or somebody else close to you. That's normally where that word is thrown around when you're having issues in those relationships. But anyways, you get resentful, like, well, I'm bending over backwards to do things with this person or to do whatever. And it seems like a one-way street. And more often than not, it's probably unintentional, because guys just don't do that. But it doesn't mean that it makes you feel any less off, So that's kind of my, commentary there.
Yeah, I think to your point, and I would go as far to say that it's about a lack of prioritization of fulfillment. I don't know that I go through my days thinking about how could I be more fulfilled. But after some of these interactions, that's probably the best way to describe it. It's a fulfillment. It is a really good feeling. You haven't necessarily accomplished anything, or maybe it wasn't productive. Certainly you can do things together and multitask in that regard. But I would say it really is that interest and I would go as far to say this is a broader problem about prioritizing the important versus the urgent. What I mean by that is I think we're running around solving for all the urgent things in our day, right? We've got to get here, get there, get this done, get that done, get this kid to here and get this kid to there, all these different things. And there's a lot of important aspects of our life to keep ourselves in a good place. And I would say a lot of the spiritual investment is in a similar vein. I don't care whether you're doing meditation or you're doing yoga or you're going to mass or you're going to adoration or something like that. Like those are similar things where it's like, it's fulfilling. You never walk out of church, at least I haven't in a while, and thought, well, that was a waste of time. Shouldn't have done that. But it's not necessarily at the top of the list either. And some of that is, I think we've talked about this at times, you go back to our evolutionary wiring. We didn't have time to focus on this sort of stuff. It was like, you need to be doing something to make sure you survive the day and that you're alive tomorrow. And so I think that's some of that internal wiring of just being productive and making sure we're making progress. And so some of this new era, again, compared to our evolutionary wiring of, hey, let's focus on ourselves. Let's make sure that we are fulfilled and we have the right connection and we're investing spiritually. I think for me, the biggest challenge is continuing to prioritize that. And that was honestly a lot of what Eternize was based on and founded on, was this, I'm just running around like a chicken with my head cut off, chasing my tail, trying to get all the things done, cross everything off the list, go, 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 go. And it's just like, reset and make sure that the important things are getting done.
Do you feel like it's happenstance or that we have found community? And what would you say to somebody that, like, I don't really have anybody at this point in my life? I'm 30, I'm 40, and I have no real male figure or connection. And they want to have more of that in their lives. Where would you go? Where would you start?
I personally would say shared interests. I mean, identify those things that you're passionate about, that you're interested in. I would start there. I think for me, that is, and I mean, I think spiritual is a great place to start, because I think there's a quality and a characteristic of someone else who's interested in that's going to make them more predisposed, I think, to that same interest and having that connection and community and vulnerability even, I think, and humility even, I think. So I would say that, but then I would look at shared interests, whether it's exercise or video games or whatever you might be interested in. I think somehow finding your way into a community there is a great place to start.
I would agree. It is. There's got to be a lot of trepidation and fear there. I get that. We've talked about the Seattle stories numerous times. I was at a point in my life where I really wasn't comfortable, which is crazy counter to the way high school was lived. But like, I really wasn't comfortable, and it took somebody else. It was you, but it could have been anybody, to get me out and to start exposing myself to just people in general. And I think that with the way, if somebody is lonely, they're still typically going to have connection to the outside world through technology. And when that's the only connection you have, you probably look at the world a lot differently than it really is. Cam running around the perimeter of the United States is a great example. One of the things that he accomplished doing that was he accomplished justifying that his perception of the world as a good place was right. And that, he, from small town to small town, everybody he met was just as kind as could be and were willing to take him in. People offered him, their couches and didn't even know the guy. And I think, though, if the lens you're looking at the world through is a Reddit forum or a Facebook post or something else, it can be very scary, because your perception of the world is that everybody is angry, everybody's out to get you, everybody's super polarized, because people can be keyboard warriors and can be more confrontational in those. So I think I would encourage people to recognize it isn't like that. 99% of the time, someone would not say that to your face. And 99% of the time, it was probably done in a fit of emotional a lack of emotional self-control, and they probably really don't even feel that strongly about it. They just wanted to win an argument or whatever. So put that fear aside, find somebody with shared interests, find a group with a shared interest. That's a positive way to use social media, right? Is there are ways to connect with groups and get out there in person. It could be playing cards, it could be playing golf, whatever. And I think once you start that process, you'll slowly discover that there's a lot more good out there than is perceived.
I also think it's not something that happens overnight too. So this is another thing. You've got to manage your expectations. It's not something where you're going to go and try something, and the first time you talk to somebody or attend some sort of group of shared interests, you're all of a sudden going to have this like lifelong community of people to do life with. I think for me, a lot of mine connections and relationships have started on just like one-on-ones, just like a breakfast. And I think that's a simple way to also start. Just like, I think it's very easy to say, hey, let's catch up sometime. It'd be great to grab breakfast or grab lunch. And these, over time, you have these one-on-ones, and it creates these kind of tentative networks, and you start to have connections with people, right? Even if they're surface level, that then start to connect in different ways because you have lunch with two different people who are really connected. And then you might get invited to a poker night, or you might get invited to do something with a group. So I think sometimes it's just putting yourself out there, as difficult as that is. And as I say that here, knowing that there's so much of my life that I would have not entertained that. I would have not gone out there and done that. But having the fortune of being right place, right time on a couple of occasions and getting over that hump, and putting myself around someone who has kind of broken down some of those barriers for me, I think I have a lot of fruit in some of those meals.
Why do you think, that's good stuff. Why do you think friendships, at least in my experience, males from high school or college tend to fade over time? Like how many friends do you have from high school? How close are you? Same with college. And why do you think someone that was maybe at one point in time one of those people and now isn't?
I think it depends on how you define it. For me, I will tell you that my best friend, I've got a few of them, but probably my best friend that goes as far back as I can remember is Brad Norris. So we've been best friends basically since third grade. Now it looks different now. We don't communicate. I mean, we text back and forth every couple of weeks or week, and so it's not like we're connecting and bonding and spending a lot of time together on a regular basis. He's got a family, I've got a family, but I know if I needed something, I could call Brad up at any time, and that would be there. So I think what's interesting is how you characterize that, because I would say there was a point in time where Brad and I were spending a lot more time together. We're playing golf together, either when we were going through school or even thereafter. We were spending, we didn't have all the priorities we have, but I would say that's still a long relationship. And even Ricky Kiley's probably very similar. It's a long-term relationship that's 20, 30 plus years. It might look a little different, but I would say that connection still persists.
For me, it's geographical proximity. Everybody I went to high school with moved to a different state. I think the closest to us is Ohio. So I have one friend like that that's a couple hours away, 2-3 hours away. But geographical proximity, and then in certain circumstances, we still have a lot in common. I mean, I think all of the friends, save one from high school, there was a group of 7 of us, have kids. They're, all do similar things. They all are, I think, taking relatively similar approaches to life. We're all in pretty wildly different industries, but at the same time, we still get together probably every other year. So it's still there, but I think geographical proximity is a big thing. And then, not all of the nuances of our lives line up. And there isn't the same level of relatability because we aren't in the same environment all the time. Mm. I don't know, man. I wonder if, and I don't want to derail, but I will. Well, not really. I wonder if they had it right. I wonder if there was a recognition of the importance of male community 50, 60 years ago. And that's why these clubs existed. And that's why these activities existed with men. And there was a recognition of, hey, when men are together in community, because you would think if you rewind 50,000 years, that doing life as a community then, when you're hunting, when you're building, when you're doing all of these things, is going to be much more successful than doing it on your own. So again, maybe 50 years ago, in the 50s, 60s, 70s, when those clubs were available and people were doing things like that on a more consistent basis, that they had it right. And that, maybe that's something we're missing nowadays. And we've replaced it with this very surface level engagement, like texting memes, social media stuff.
It's really fascinating. The entry point for people to find community is arguably harder.
For sure.
How often, it makes me think about this, how often do you guys just open yourself up to new community? Like, hey, I'm going on a run, put it on Facebook, who wants to join me for 3 minutes or for 3 miles? Like, how often should we be putting ourselves, arguably we have as much community as we can handle, but that's a really interesting point, because I think it is harder now to find that community because a lot of those clubs don't exist. And I don't believe we're proactively opening up those opportunities.
And there's so much more. I don't know if we're more neurotic now too, like over analyzing relationships. Maybe that's because we have more access from a social media perspective. And we, there's the concept with social media influencers now. I forget what it is that they call it, but it's like you are exposed to someone so much, you think you know them. It's a parasocial relationship, right? Where, you see this person talk to you on Twitch for 4 hours a day. So it's like they're your best friend, but you don't know them. And,
it's interesting.
So you look at other men out there, and and I'll be open and I guess honest about this. And, you're like, text somebody, hey, you want to go for a run? And then you see on Strava they ran with somebody else 2 hours later, and they told you no. Like, I'm sure this has happened to me, right? And you overanalyze that, and then you hesitate because you're afraid and you don't want to reach out to that particular person again. Whereas prior to having all that insight into someone's daily life, you could just attribute it to they couldn't do it that day. That's fine. And maybe that wouldn't give you as much pause when you reached out the next time because you didn't see what they were doing or whatever. So that's something for me that I wonder is do we overanalyze these relationships? And, if somebody says no to something, I think I have a tendency to do that. I don't know how you guys feel about it, but I do feel like there are times when I'm fearful to reach out. You get asked to go to a run 3 weeks in a row, and then all of a sudden you don't. And you're like, why? I saw the group ran today. Why didn't they text me? Well, a lot of times I think you probably need to look in the mirror and be like, well, why don't you reach out every once in a while, dude? But I know I have trouble with that.
I think some of that in today's day and age is just you have visibility to it now because you can see they ran on Strava, which I think in the past you may not have ever known.
Right.
Yeah, I think certain things, I think we live in an environment where there's a lot of information out there, and we're probably trying to draw conclusions and make assumptions, and there's an element of self-preservation in that we're kind of trying to protect ourselves from any sort of potential threat, although I say threat very loosely because there's really not a meaningful one out there. But yeah.
Like, what's the logical next step? I find myself most times, and I think we all embody this social capability, Trent probably more than others, but, I'll find myself at a child's basketball game with another dad and we'll have a great conversation, and it ends there. And you find yourself like, man, I wish it didn't, or what's the next step? And then the next time you see the guy, a lot of times,
You're like, what's his name?
Yeah, or it just, you barely even acknowledge each other's existence, even though you spent 2 hours talking at a game. And I don't know, I remember hearing stories from people who have children that are a little bit older. It's like, oh yes, that's where you find your people. Is it children's sports or children's events? And I'm like, well, my kids are in almost to middle school. And nope. It's so much more fleeting. It's like, we'll go over to one of the girls' friends' houses and we'll have a great time with their parents. and then it like never happens again. And then it goes back to the whole neurotic thing about, well, did they not like us? Did we invite ourselves over? Like, again, maybe it's overthinking it. It's just, I struggle with this. I mean, this is a great topic and I love any insight because I struggle with this mightily. And the other part too is, like you said, shared interests. I don't go to the bar and watch sports. Mm-hmm. I watch sports, but like I'm not going and having beers 3 nights a week. Not this age. Again, to each their own, but I can't do it because I don't feel well the next day if I do. But this is a tough one. This is a tough one for me.
What have you, I mean, you mentioned you've got a big passion for this, and it's something you've, I think, oriented yourself towards. You've had groups that have been successful. You've had groups that haven't. Or that maybe haven't persisted. Like, what are some of the patterns or trends that you've noticed, and how have you approached this?
Great questions. My friend group has changed dramatically over time, and it seems to change with seasons. One of my flaws as a human, my pastor actually told me this, is I'm apostolic by nature, and I love to meet new people. So that's an easy thing for me. I love to get excited. I see potential in everyone and get together and serve whatever purpose I feel that is, and then I move on. There's very few friends. I still have friends from high school, and I still have some friends from college, but I have very few close friends for longer than a decade. And that's not because they're not great people. Some of my groups have been with families and friends. Like, to keep your kids engaged, you spend time with their parents. And some of the times the challenges is that we're also different, right? I have been lucky enough to find a really good church and a really good group of men that we find challenges and other things outside of church. Which I think is, you guys nailed that with, not that there's anything wrong with like the men's prayer group and getting together and praying and things like that, but I have found more so with Christians doing stuff outside the church that are physically and mentally challenging. And so I've been really lucky to find people to do life with in those channels. I would say creating opportunities for those things to manifest is important, and making yourself accessible to other people is important, because there's a need out there for that community. And that's one thing that comes a little bit more natural to me. And so I've been able to make some really good connections over the years, helping people do things and learn about stuff that I'm passionate about. So when I asked you, like, hey, if you put on Facebook, I'm running at 3:00 today or whatever, or Instagram, there might be 10 people show up that would just love to spend 30 minutes with you to get a little bit of that. And likewise with something that you're into. So I don't do extremely well long term. I generally have, 4 to maybe 8 really close, deep relationships and friends, and that seems to shift over time to some extent. So I don't have a silver bullet, but
you've had a lot of success with this Track Tuesday thing. And there are so many elements of Track Tuesday that are kind of, that make it difficult, right? One of the things with that run I had this morning was, and it wasn't even that early, it was 6:30. You guys get up and run at 5 a.m. on a Tuesday mornings, and you do it in the winter and all year round, and you've grown it to, for something that's that, from my perspective, unenjoyable to get to the size it has. Like, what do you attribute that to? Is it consistency? Like what?
I think consistency is big. We started this in 2022, maybe 21 or 22. We used to run 4 miles the Bridgewater Loop near our house, and we did that on Mondays, and then we switched it to Tuesdays, and then eventually we moved over to the Garin track, and there was 3 or 4 of us for like 2 years, especially in the winter. It was like 4 of us that went out there, and it was just consistency. And I mean, we've talked about this, how long it takes things to build and others to kind of see the value and feel the value, experience the value. And it slowly built. And I think some of the underlying elements, what I would attribute that to, certainly sticking with that, creating the space, giving it time to manifest. I think from a spiritual perspective, there's a shared interest for people to get their prayer in and their exercise in and do that in community just became a very compelling thing. We tried to make it fun and put some time and energy into varying the workouts and doing different things that I think people found interesting as well as part of it versus going out there and, monotonously doing the same thing. But I think people started to really enjoy the community. We started a text thread, and that group texts throughout the week. And you start to get to know these guys, and then you see them in different places, and then someone invites someone else. So I think like any of the ventures that we've talked about, I think it's really, really hard to build those initial connections. And then, it gets easier thereafter. I would say naturally, those are a few of the things that I would attribute that to.
Should tell the story about how they put the banner up on the full mow across the.
Yeah. One of the Track Tuesday guys, he lives right on the Monon, and I ran the full mow, and he's a character, and he had kind of alluded to he was going to do something, and it was the year I was going to run the first half on my own and then run with a friend the last half to get them in. And so I come down the 146th Street Bridge, and I see Todd chalked. And then I go a little further, and it says daily. And then so I'm like, oh my gosh, here we go. I mean, this is chalked on the Monon on a Saturday morning that hundreds, if not thousands, of people are traversing. If you know me, I'm very conservative. I don't like to be in the spotlight. Like anything that's drawing attention to me is horrible. And so and then it said, is a savage. I mean, just like in plain sight as you're running down the Monon. And I just was so embarrassed. And I turned the corner, and up above the Monon is a picture of me, like blown up. This has to be like 5 foot by 3 foot sign strung on trees. I mean, the Monon's a pretty wide trail, strung on trees at both sides, huge picture. Todd Daly is a savage again. And I'm just mortified. But it's just some of that is fun. By the way, that did stay up for, I want to say 24 hours. Someone took a picture of it the next day. Someone from Marion had taken a picture and posted that on Facebook. But that was one of the Track Tuesday guys that pulled that prank.
Yeah, with this is a tough one. I don't know. I mean, not to belabor it, but I wonder how much of this, I guess, situation we find ourselves in goes back to the different cultural expectations of men now, and the way that society, the expectations that society has of what we are, what we should be. I mean, that has been a real hot button topic in political circles and any kind of circles over the last probably 5 years. Are men losing their masculinity, if you will? And I think one of the things that I've noticed is really putting my relationships in jeopardy is that shift. And I'm not saying it's right, wrong, or indifferent, but I know there are situations. One thing we do a lot, we talked about it in prior episode, is relay races. And that's become like this really cool community aspect of our running community. We've probably done, different people have done different ones. I don't know, call it 7 or 8, 2 GA 5Ks, a couple Ragnars, a couple Hood to Coasts. And, the last 2 years we haven't done anything. And I think it goes back to, I think men in general I guess I can just speak for myself, but like we have so many expectations from a family perspective that it's become such a difficult thing to organize, and the energy that's required. And I think this goes back to another episode we had. We were talking about grit. It's either energy or time. And like you said, yeah, I've grown Track Tuesday from 4 to 20. It's taken 3 years. You could probably have grown it quicker if you went around the church and handed out flyers and talked about it all the time and added everybody. But there's a lot more energy that goes into that. And now I see these experiences that we've had collectively, and we have people tell us all the time. And I think we feel the same way about a lot of these events, that they're like life-changing, but it's become so hard to coordinate because of different expectations and different levels of, different types of prioritization happening in people's lives. And I feel like it's such a travesty. I definitely don't have the answers when it comes to this. Maybe it is putting in more effort, spending more time, prioritizing it a little bit more highly, like you said, but I definitely see it as a problem. And the more we talk about this, the more I recognize that there is a hole that needs to be filled. I had a buddy come in from Seattle last week, and it was fantastic. To see one of those old faces, a guy that I lived with for a number of years that helped, was part of the TPD business. Shout out Vernon. He comes into town and he's engaged with the kids, and we're going, I get to show him my life, and he's going to practice. It was so awesome to have that. And so you realize what you're missing out on. And, I definitely wonder what the steps are we've lived in this neighborhood now for 7 or 8 years, and I still don't have a relationship like that in this neighborhood. I have a friend or two that like I can call or text and we can do this, that, and the other thing, but like not like that, man. And you at the same time, you don't want to feel like you're stepping on somebody's toes either, because you're conscious of all the stuff that you have from a responsibility standpoint. Mm-hmm. So I don't know how you guys navigate that.
Well, part of that's probably because of the wars you've been through with Vernon.
Yeah.
Like when we were younger, we were making memories, because I believe you have to make memories. Well, one of the ways we used to make memories was to get after it, and now it's like we're making memories through running. And what are you going to do? Because I think to seal the deal, but what are those ways that you make memories and have experiences together that you're never going to forget? And some of the things that you alluded to are the races, and when you were younger, it was the parties. And so some of the more meaningful strong relationships are with people that I've been through a lot with, frankly.
Yeah. I think that's how it's shared. I think we talked about that through difficult things. You share bonds. And again, you go back to fraternities. Fraternities, that's not one for me in particular that I don't have a lot of relationships, deep relationships that stemmed from fraternity, but I know a lot do. And part of that was just my shared interest, wasn't the shared interest of that group. But I think fraternities, those relationships last a lifetime. And in a lot of cases, I know a lot of people in their college fraternities, they're still 30, 40, 50 years later. They've got active connections there. And I think some of that is because of the shared struggle that you go through. In something like that. But one of the questions I want to ask you guys is just, as we look at this, it's hard for, I think some of the things we've said, it's hard for guys to find community. Some of us have stumbled into them, right place, right time. And although I think kind of our hypothesis is societally, it's becoming more difficult, maybe less prevalent, whether it's less men's clubs or less prioritization of it, or more expectations of responsibilities around the house, whatever that is. Like, what do you think the longer term implications are of something like this? Like, how does this manifest as you fast forward 10, 20, 30, 40 years? Do you feel like this is maybe cyclical and it recovers, and people, men find, if it gets to a point where we find that and we can kind of bring that back? Or is it something where that could continue to deteriorate and manifest in whatever way that does in terms of mental well-being or otherwise?
I think the interesting part to add to that question is like the distractions is another piece.
Sure.
Is, will the next generation even know? Because they never experienced it. Did they ever? We had so much community when we grew up with friends. Do we believe that I'm sure there's some groups of friends that have the similar community as we did, depending on how they were raised. If they were raised by technology, will they even know? Like, because I believe there'll be a gaping hole, and I think that's where connection and mental illness and things start to pop up because there's a void that can't be filled by anything but that.
Why don't you go a little deeper? I'm an introvert, so I could argue that I am on this planet to leave it better off than I found it in some form or fashion, and a lot of that time is me kind of putting forth that effort in some form or fashion to create those outcomes. I think you have an interesting perspective. You said at the top of the episode, which is community is like, that's why we're here. That's kind of somewhat of the end and the means. Like, talk about that. Like, I'd be interested to understand that, because honestly, had I not experienced the community in the way I have, I would have been perfectly fine, probably ignorant maybe in that regard, but I could have just gone about plugging away. I know I was in IT for 10 years. You guys were too. There's a lot of people that just do that, and they just do their own thing. But why do we feel like community is so important?
Who do you think you're making the world a better place for?
People, other people.
I think that's why I feel that way. I don't believe working back in biblical days, they worked to come together as men in a community. It's not as much about the job. It's not the problem we're solving. Like building the next Amazon or whatever the business is, that doesn't matter in eternity. Like, at least this is the way that I'm gonna talk about this and look at this. Like, jobs don't really matter. Making the world a better place. Well, I would argue that, like, making the world a better place for individuals, for people to come together in community to pursue a relationship with Christ and a relationship with each other. So I don't know how else to articulate it, but I just think those other things that we do are things that keep us busy or that we believe give us purpose. And arguably they do give us some purpose and they do give us some meaning, but I just don't think they're as important.
To me, when you say important and you're talking about community, is it kind of, to you, a source of happiness and fulfillment and joy? Is that kind of why you feel community is so important? Like, is there any kind of source of that you could expound on? Is life more enjoyable for you in community, or you feel like community allows you to positively impact others more meaningfully because you're with them in person and you can pour into them, or vice versa? Like, in what elements do you feel like you get the most value out of community is maybe the question.
I'm not sure I can answer that, but I want to pose this question. Let's go back in the days where we all lived out of caves, hunter-gatherers. There was nothing else. All we did was try to survive, right? So we only did the things that required survival. We're in community. Does that answer the question? Like, strip all the other stuff away that we've created, right? We've created all these other systems and things and automobiles. Strip it down to caveman, and we're all living in a cave trying to survive, and we have to go out and hunt. We have to, basically eat and drink water or whatever to survive. That's kind of when I say the rest of the stuff doesn't matter, it matters. Like, money matters and cars matter and like all that stuff matters. But if we strip away at the core, to me, community and people, I mean, it's how this thing all started. And I think that's where the most important thing is. Now, the way you impact that and the way you interact with that obviously is way different now, but I'm looking at it from a caveman's perspective.
Mm-hmm.
So then this goes back to something else we've discussed prior. Is there tension? Maybe this is what I'm feeling. Is there tension between the way we're fulfilling those desires today? Meaning that at some point in time, we talked in the past about AI and about different things as technology, and what you refer to as other stuff continues to propagate. and we lose, I think the thing I brought to there is definitive proof you can communicate via mind. And we're losing these skills and these abilities. Do we think that, what's happened is that there is this desire to connect with people, and there was so much joy and excitement in that 50,000 years ago, or prior to all the different ages we've gone through, bronze, gold, and industrial revolution, yada, yada, yada. Do we feel like there's this tension now because these relationships have become fulfilled via such surface level means, like instead of getting what our body is traditionally wired to get, which is this great feedback from other people and seeing joy and happiness in their achievements and successes, and seeing joy and happiness in the community's achievements and successes. Now we're satiating that with sending memes over Instagram, and this dopamine hit of, they hit the LOL sign to the meme I sent, so I'm satisfied. But yet there's this deeper yearning, and we're kind of fighting this. We're placating it with this bullshit social media text messages. I'm guilty of it. I send 20 memes every day. And it's giving us just enough that we are not putting the priority we should put, and not true. And like you said, the more this happens, the less we're aware of this, and slowly we're fading. And maybe we get to a point where we've evolved technology to a place where it keeps this dormant, and we don't, that strong desire continues to fade as we evolve. And that sucks. But like, I feel like maybe, I don't know.
Let me ask you this. Do you feel like some of the things, the patterns that we're talking about seem to be not necessarily specific to men, although vulnerability and humility, some of those characteristics that can be barriers to group formation and depth are prevalent. But do you feel like we keep coming back to, I think in a lot of ways, distractions and all these things to do? Do you feel like this environment is having a similar impact on marriage type relationships as it is on, when I say same-sex relationships, obviously in more of a communal way, but do you feel like that is also suffering from, whether you look at even just in men in general, I feel like get a little bit of a rap or a stereotype for not being good in relationships, for lack of vulnerability or other reasons, right? There's a stereotype there. So maybe that's question one, but also just question two, is all the noise and the distraction and all of this stuff going on also had any sort of negative implication on
I don't know
marriage
what's right. Meaning that I don't know if as a society we ever got there. Because if you look historically at marriages, like there were very, very defined roles. And in a lot of sense, like the man was such the head of the house, end all be all. And the woman was there to raise the children and to be subservient and to do these things. And there were instances, I'm sure, where you could look back and find, I mean, depending on how far back you go, women don't talk unless you're spoken to type things. So, I don't know if I think as we've evolved into current day, there's more of a level playing field there. But I still don't know if, I still don't know what's right. Maybe it boils down to just the amount of effort you put into the particular relationship. But that's a really good question. What are your thoughts?
I think it absolutely does. I believe that the distractions and the way we're living, as busy as we are with the kids, the running around, the constant, it's never enough mentality is absolutely affecting marriages. And then you topple that with the social media making you feel like everyone else's life is so great, right? So you have created this paradox where we're spending more time watching other people's lives or running our kids around so they turn out as best they can. And then you're watching other people and everyone's life is a little bit better than yours. And then I think people are sitting there scrolling through their phones, and I'm guilty of it, and my wife and so forth is like, I don't think the pursuit is there as much, like men pursuing women, and the connection isn't as deep. And I feel like that's something that, I mean, I don't know what the percentage now is of divorces, but it's not going the other way. It's not getting any better, right? And I think some of that has to do with the society we live in and the things that we prioritize and the way that we're living our lives.
So let's unpack that. I'm going to go back to, I'm getting my train of thought back. So we had really defined roles. Marriages were obviously
Sure.
much more, I wouldn't say much more, right? But the divorce rate was considerably less, and we had defined roles. And honestly, if today's society looks back at those defined roles, chauvinism and all of these things, you throw those words around. Now we're apparently on more equal ground, but we're busier. There's like,
Do you think, though, there was less divorces, but do you think that means that they were happier, or is it just wasn't as accepted?
well, that's kind of my bigger question, right? Why? Was it because of the fear?
Stuck it
Was
out.
it fear? They just stuck it out, and then
Shame. They didn't want to be shamed. Like, people just stuck it out, and they're like, I guess I'll just stay in it because it's going to be worse without it. But I think the generation before them was like, you stick things out. Like, once you're in, you're in.
Yeah.
And so I think there was a level of that bred into them that, like, you made this choice, you made your bed, you're living in it. And now it's like, I'm just gonna jump out without trying. Some people try, but
Well, I mean, I hear it all the time. Two ships passing in the night, right? Like that's a metaphor for relationships nowadays. I get it, and I don't know if it takes more. Or it takes effort. Period. I don't know if it takes more effort today than it did 50 years ago. And I don't know if the stick it out approach. We can all agree that there were definitely situations, and there are still today situations where sticking it out is not the play.
correct.
But what is that like? But then there's fleeing at first sight, or first sign of, on the other side of things. So it's like, where is that balance? But your question is well posed. Yeah, there's a lot going on, and maybe there's also confusion as to responsibility and who does what, and because we talk a lot about in business. We talk a lot about finding people who have skill sets that complement ours. And I think that we are wired as humans, male and female, with most of the time, certain capabilities, skills, emotional well-being, or whatever you want to call it. Not well-being, but the ability to connect emotionally with our children in different ways. And because roles are so intertwined, and there are women that are more well adapted to do certain things professionally, and there are women that are more well adapted to do things at home, and men and vice versa. And maybe that's also causing.
It's really going to be interesting to see how this evolves. I've lived on both sides of it. So my wife, I met at Liberty Mutual, and she's very professionally wired. And for us, it's been, I would say, as you talk about the equality and as the playing field has leveled over the last couple of decades, that's been a really positive thing for us and for her, because I feel like she's wired more for that. When in probably prior generations, she would have been expected to stay home and just be out of her element, but just find a way to mentally get through it. And so it's been great for her to be able to lean into her strengths. We talked in another episode about spending your time where you bring the most value, and you also find the most fulfillment. That's where you're going to get the greatest, or passion. That's where you're going to get the greatest return on your time investment. And so for her, that's been fantastic. And I think we've made incredible progress in terms of leveling the playing field, and allow for those who are oriented to that to have that opportunity, right? To live into that. I also would say that it does create some confusion on the home front of like, all right, well, who's doing what, and whose job is maybe more demanding, and if that's the case, then is everything still kind of split 50-50, or is one of us expected to do more based on the intensity of our job, either in that particular season or more broadly? And so that's been, it's complicated things, certainly. To your point, I don't know what's right or wrong. It's going to be really interesting. I think we all believe that it's right for people to be able to lean into their strengths and to be able to be fulfilled in whatever they're doing. If someone isn't wired to stay at home with the kids and focus on that full time, I don't think it makes any sense at all for them to have to do that, right? When we look at self-actualization and making the most of yourself, like, let everyone kind of have an opportunity to set themselves up for success in that regard. However, I think there's still, and kind of living it with that, how does that evolve and how can we figure out, I think some of the complexities. It's very new, right, to us to have everything split. I think there are times where, where there were more roles, like you didn't know something, you didn't know how to do something, you really valued that the other person did it, you didn't want to have to deal with it. It was just like there was this huge psychological barrier, and there was just a lot of gratitude that someone else was handling that, right? And that's where I think some of those roles is like, it made it easier, right? The
Dieting versus fasting.
Sure. Absolutely. And so, I mean, you have in some cases where the spouse, in prior generations, the wife, for example, didn't want to worry about having to bring in money and go work a job and deal with the workforce and the stresses of that. And especially with the way they were being treated, not being paid necessarily the same wages and all that kind of stuff. And so they really valued the fact that the man or the male was out kind of doing that element, bringing in the funds for the family to survive. And then on vice versa, I think the men were so grateful to not have to deal with maybe the cooking or the providing of the food or some of those sorts of things, just because that role was embedded and there was a psychological barrier and they were distant to it. And so as things have gotten split up, right, and it's more half and half, and everyone's kind of doing everything, and then how do you count, right? It's like you get into this battle of like, well, who's doing more or you're doing less, and well, I mean, it's complicated and it's hard.
Yeah, if you're keeping score, it's not a good sign. But I think we've all been there, especially when the kids were younger. Like, I got up last time. It's your time to get up, and that
everybody goes through that.
That never ends well. But at the end of the day, I think society and the way that we've set this up, it's not poised for deep connection. Whether that's with your spouse or with other people, it feels like deep connection is harder to come by, it's harder to foster, and it's harder to maintain. And I think you are right. I believe generations past knew that. And I think it went from probably having more of these fraternity and men's clubs to bring that together. And I think some of that turned into then after the one generation who might have, the purpose of it was more for the community side, it turned into maybe a celebration or a fraternity that we know of today, which is drinking and partying. But maybe that's not why they were originally established.
What about, I mean, I think a lot of people see their immediate family as their community these days, right? Like, if someone were to say, would you rather go out and play golf with a group of guys, foursome and go whatever, would you rather go out and play with Noah? I'd tell you 10 times out of 10, I'd rather go play with Noah. And like, that would just, that, and so there's kind of community there, but I think there's there would be a perception. It's like, well, that's really more family. That's not community with other men. And certainly there's dialogue, there's different dialogue that I would have with him and things I would be able to share, or it would make sense to share and discuss versus what I could maybe discuss with other men. But I think that's interesting to me when I talk about kind of doing my own thing as an introvert. My family kind of is my community in that regard. Your guys' thoughts on that?
I wish it was more acceptable to introduce kids into that type of broader, because I do think that for me, there are times when I would rather it be just the guys. And there are times where I'd rather it would be, just me and my kids. But then there are times where I wish it was a little bit more socially acceptable to integrate the two. I mean that, like, I can remember a time a couple of years ago where I started running with somebody in the neighborhood, and like the first time he brought his son, not cool, and then the second time he brought his son, and that was and the third time, and it became his focal point. The entire run, which is normally filled with conversation and exploration and learning about person, it's don't do this, stop here, slow down, and so of course that lives in my mind as it relates to my daughter, because I do bring Kay to a lot of running things. And so I'm always super self-conscious of, am I dampening or ruining the environment by bringing a kid who maybe doesn't have the social skills necessary to engage and integrate with the broader group? But for me, there's two, I see value in both. I was asked to run yesterday with Caleb and Jacob, and I ran with Kay instead. So most of the time I would choose her, but I'd also like to be able to, or maybe it's Miles when he's old enough, expose him to the guys. And like that would be the perfect community right there, is when the kids are old enough to be able to, I would love to do relays with Kay and Roman and Noah and us. Like that's my pinnacle.
Yeah. So my kids are a little older. I would say I'm still kind of in the things that my kids are at a similar level to me. I'm 100% spent. So for the last 5 years, I've taken my kids skiing. And I remember the first time I took them skiing, I carried 4 sets of skis and in ski boots. Those of you who've walked in ski boots know how difficult that is. A couple of football fields, and just getting them, my wife got them all dressed. By the time we got them dressed, we're sweating, and then you're carrying stuff. And this is a lot of work, right? And there, I'd like nothing better, and I couldn't wait to get them to ski school and then go ski with you or someone else and be like, we're going to go our speed. And I did that for 4 years, and they've gotten better each year. This year, it was kind of a magical. The last day I was with my 3 oldest, and I'm like, where do you want to go? Anywhere. And my kids they tracking their time on an app, and they're skiing 40, 45, 50 miles an hour. One of them snowboarding. It's like, this is the moment I was dreaming of 5 years ago, that they're all to a level that I'm not holding them up and they're not holding me up. And it's this it's happening, right? It's it's that experience. So I think when your kids get to an age, I know at least for me, because there is a part of the training side, and I love going golfing with Roman, and I love watching their sports. My kids are playing a game, I'm there encouraging them, I'm part of it. But if we're doing something together, there is something to be said of when they get to a level of, and then what happens, right, is they get to a level of proficiency of where you're at, and then you got a small window before we fall off, right? Because there's going to be a point in time, how many years can I ski with them before they're going to be like, Dad, come on. I already had to stop and use the restroom more than they wanted me to. So I know it's a short-lived time where those paths cross, and I'm just entering that phase, and it's really exciting.
What's interesting there, because you hear this a lot, and you said it, right? There's a short window of time. You hear people talk a lot about making sure, your kids are only going to be around for so long. Make sure you pay attention to your marriage, because when they're gone, you're not going to have kids' sports as a topic of conversation every night, or kids' school as a topic of conversation. You better have kept up on that. And maybe the same holds true for your male friendships outside of that, and I'm not judging anybody, but, and maybe this is something that I will be more conscious of, is do everything that your kids want to do now, and, structure your whole life around them. But, don't expect a solid community to be there if you're not prioritizing or putting time into it when that short window is over and they go to college. Because as we know, I talk to Dad once or twice a week. Okay. I'm never here. We all live in different cities. You're here, right? But we live in different cities. You see him or talk to him maybe a little bit more frequently, but eventually that'll be us. And so, I look forward to where you're at, because I think that's going to be an epic 6 years or whatever. But then, when they get boyfriends or girlfriends,
it's a short window.
Yeah.
I think it starts sooner these days too, with social media and some of the other ways that they can connect digitally and virtually. I think there were times before I think for us, before we had a car, there was only so much we could do autonomously, and only so many ways we could communicate. Certainly AOL and ICQ were starting to manifest at that point in time, but I think they form, this is another dimension of it, is that their communities, and them forming communities sooner and what the depth of those communities are, I think is a whole nother angle of this. But
I mean, yeah, we could spend an entire episode talking about the communities that we see our kids in and the positives and negatives of those, and that's a whole different ballgame.
I mean, is there any way, a lot of what we talked about too is like instilling different things, right? In the kids in a prior episode, how to instill grit, how to instill the importance of community even in kids, or how to get them to experience the value of that and the enjoyment of that. Because Trent, you said they may not even know.
Right?
Right?
I think that's the sacrifice that, like, one of the things that me and Angel didn't realize was so important was engaging with the parents and the kids that our kids are in the classroom with, and how important that community is. And Roman had he had a couple of really good friends, and he has a great friend group, but you have to be proactive. Mom used to do this. She was great at this. I had play dates all the time. You have to be proactively involved with the kids in their class or their parents or the kids on their team, and you're hanging out, and sometimes with people that aren't like you, or sometimes that wouldn't be the people you would pick, but they're getting to experience that community. When Isaiah, my 7-year-old, is jumping on the couch watching Ninjago Lego, like, he's dying to be with friends. And anytime, like, hey, you want to go over and see your buddy Theo? He was like, yes, absolutely. We go pick up Theo, or we go to his house, and they go run around for 2 hours. They'll run in the woods, they'll ride the 4-wheelers, they'll do whatever. But I think we have to sacrifice, and some of that is putting ourselves in those situations, even if we don't want to be, to make sure they're seeing the importance of being around people and having that community.
That's a benefit we have that I don't think either of you guys have as much as our neighborhood.
Yeah.
I mean,
absolutely.
you put the bigger your house, the more land you have, typically the smaller your neighborhood is around you. We have got to experience what it was like. I saw my kids experiencing what it was like for us to grow up just last weekend. There was the magnetic effect here in Parkview. It was us and Leaps and Fams and whatever, and then we'd have friends over, and then they'd have friends over, and then more people, and the next thing you know, we're playing hide and seek with 100 people in Parkview, and that's been a good thing. It's kind of happening naturally where our kids will get out and they'll get on the trampoline, and then the Kates will come over, and then the Hostettlers, and then all of a sudden there's a dozen kids or 15 kids in the backyard, and so that's happened a little bit more naturally for us, but you're right, though. There are situations, and again, it goes to putting yourself out there, just like it is with the relationships we started off this episode with. It's maybe I don't know this person well or get along with this person, but I have to put the effort out there so that my kids, can.
And one of the things that we did, and this is no fault to us, but we moved into communities that were a little bit out of the reach for kids our age. So where TJ is in a community where that's a huge benefit. I wish my kids could go outside and they had friends in proximity to where they could just get to them. And I know your community, there's a little bit older kids, but there may be some now where we live on 6 acres, and we made that decision and we wanted that land. But now for my kids to see other kids, we have to call up and make a play date, or we have to go drive someone and get them. They can't just go outside and go down the street or go. If we lived on the same street as Theo, Isaiah would be standing at their doorway every single day. Now they're probably thankful that that's not happening, but I'm to the point now with him as my youngest, and he's 7, as I would honestly let him take a scooter down the road for a mile just to get there. Like, I feel pretty safe about that.
And we're letting the kids do more of that, like riding the bike around the like Miles, he's 6, but we'll let him ride to Braxton's house, which is half a mile.
That freedom that we had that kids don't have, I think some of that comes through intentionality of the parents, through sports and school, but it also comes through the community that you live in. And it could come through church and the people that you're hanging out with. But if you're hanging out with people that don't have kids that age, I think they're missing out on that because they learn so much just being around other kids.
Well, there's a secondary benefit of having a better community at the adult level, right? The more you spend time, like Miles is like, can I go to such and such's houses? And I haven't talked to these parents or ever met these parents. There may be a little bit of a hesitation, not necessarily from a safety perspective, although that's there. And I think, Tara feels that more than I do, but like, again, a fear. I don't know if I want to text his dad. He doesn't know me, and yada, yada, yada. And, you overcome that. But like, the more time you put into the people in your community, maybe it's just in your neighborhood, the more you get to know those dads, then, like, you don't even have to second guess it. Oh, hey, I'm going to Braxton's house. Well, I don't even have to think about that because we know his parents so well, and we would offer that same reciprocal acceptance to him if he showed up at our door. So there's a secondary benefit of putting time and effort into those, in and around you.
And we've been really lucky. We actually, when we live at the lake in the summer, we have incredible neighbors. And Isaiah's got a great buddy, Jimmy, that when Jimmy's there, Isaiah's basically living next door. But we've developed a great relationship with them. And having that ability for those kids to kind of grow up together and spend time together is really, really special because you don't have to go out of your way. It naturally happens. They can go in and out of our place and their place, and you just kind of get to that. It's just like having another child. It's really, really neat.
So bringing this back, I think one of the things we've talked about, we're in an environment where it's harder to develop connection. I think we've talked initially men's groups, but also just in general. I think it's spouses and I think even kids with our kids developing depth of connections. We talked about some of it's putting yourself out there and being willing to kind of slowly try and build community over time. We have talked about trying to minimize the distractions, the things and all the things going on, and trying to prioritize the important over the urgent, find some time and space for this sort of things. But anything else that you guys would say for people who are maybe thinking about this, other tactics that could be employed to try and fight the trend that we're seeing?
I would love for anybody listening to take on a challenge with me. You guys can feel free to as well, but I'm going to make an effort over the next, call it 60 days, 30 to 60 days, to put more effort into that aspect of life. And to, 8 episodes from now, come back and talk about the benefits or the failures that I had in that effort and endeavor, because I think it's just having the week that I spoke of last week, and Vern's going to come back in another couple of weeks, but having that and that kind of rekindling, this could be really cool. I'm going to put more effort into that community and see what happens.
It's great.
I'll throw this out there for those of you that are hanging on super late here, that are going to grind to the end. If anyone wants to run the full mow on May 31st and you live in Grant County, want to get together twice a week and run, I'm always looking for that. So I'll throw that out there to anybody that has some ambition to run their first 50K, which I will tell you is way different than the marathon. It's a much easier pace. You do it in 6-mile chunks. You're not going to kill yourself. It'll be fun to do it together. And I do most of my great conversations are through running. So we would also build a friendship in that process. So anyone that's up for that, hit us up. Got anything?
It's great.
All right. Well, thanks for tuning in. This has been a lot of fun, and hopefully you guys got some really good value. We'll see you next time.